Okay, we got a number of people logging on now. So we are streaming live on Facebook, and I want to welcome everybody. Today it is September 11th, and we are excited to get started here. Please drop your name and where you're calling in from into the chat box. We always love to see where everybody's from as you log on to the discussion today. So also, please take a look at Facebook, where we'll be sharing this video live, as well as I believe Mark is going to post the recording to his YouTube channel. So please check that out and share that out. We have some really hot topics to discuss today, including my new favorite read here. Or just read it for the second time. So we're going to talk quite a bit about Mark's new book, Measures of Success. But before I get started, let me actually introduce our guest today, since it is the top of the hour and we're ready to get started here. So Mark Graban is our guest today, and Mark is an internationally recognized consultant, published author, professional speaker, and blogger. Love your blogs, by the way. Thanks. And what I like most about Mark is his people-centered leadership approach. You guys probably hear me use the term "keep it simple." And I just love the way that Mark explains things, and even in the book, bringing things to my level, I guess, and allowing me to really understand things that are very complex, but explaining them in a practical way that I can understand using practical examples. And his experience in working with executives and frontline employees in multiple industries definitely sets him apart. He's also the author of the book Lean Hospitals: Improving Quality, Patient Safety, and Employee Engagement, which was selected for a 2009 Shingo Research and Professional Publication Award. And a side note on that, it was the first healthcare book to win this award, correct, Mark?
Yeah, but not the last. There's been a lot of great books out there,
sure.
And but it was the first, yeah.
Right. And among other books that you've co-authored and contributed to, you're also the author of the book, like I said, that we're going to be discussing today, Measures of Success. So react less, lead better, improve more. Yes. And I have to say, like I started, this was the second time that I went through this, and I was able to pull out some really great nuggets even the second time reading through it. So I appreciate everything that you have in here. And I'm curious, as we start out this discussion, can you just tell me, like, what was the motivation behind writing this book?
So I, for a long time, felt fortunate. I mean, this is going back 25 years.
Sure.
And I wish I had a copy of it handy. But a book written by Donald Wheeler. He's a PhD statistician. He was at University of Tennessee. He's still active as a consultant. So Don Wheeler was a student / contemporary in ways of Dr. Deming. Mm-hmm. And Don Wheeler's book is called Understanding Variation. And it introduces, I had been exposed to statistical process control, or control charts, SPC, as an engineer. In statistics class, when I started my career at General Motors, even though in 1995 that was not a lean culture, they used control charts, right? They used it looking at manufacturing dimensions, engine blocks and parts like that, kind of classic application of statistical process control for the quality of manufactured items. Don Wheeler's book was eye-opening in terms of applying that approach. He calls it process behavior charts, and we'll get into that today. Applying statistical process control thinking to business metrics. Not to see if the metric is, so we look at manufactured parts, there's a question of in spec and in control. We can look at business metrics to see if that metric is just in control, fluctuating around an average, or if we're actually moving it in a good direction, or if it's shifted in a bad direction. So anyway, long story short, that book has been so influential and so helpful to me in different settings. And as I've moved from different companies and different industries, it started sinking in that, to me, I would say process behavior charts and Don Wheeler's book was the most important business tool that nobody's aware of. Mm-hmm. And so I've given away, I've promoted, I've done a lot to share Don Wheeler's book and the lessons from it over the years. And I thought, in writing measures of success, I would try to bring these ideas to an audience that wasn't already being reached by Don Wheeler's book, and to use some more modern contemporary examples. But the methodology absolutely comes from Don Wheeler, going back earlier to that, Walter Schuhart. And in fact, I've heard some of the history that even though you could say Wheeler was a student of Deming's in some ways, that Don Wheeler actually taught Dr. Deming this particular application of statistical process control that Dr. Deming was certainly aware of.
Sure.
As a student of Schuhart's. But anyway, I wrote the book just to try to help share something that I found to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I love it. And for those that are maybe on the line or will be listening to this recording later on that don't know about control charts or don't know what a process behavior chart is, can you just give us a quick explanation of what that would look like and how people could understand exactly what it is that when we're talking through this?
Yeah, so one of the things you want to do is, I've got friends in the UK who work in the National Health Service who use the hashtag on Twitter, plot the dots. Like if anyone is trying to show you management reports or metrics or before and after in a Lean Six Sigma project, if you're seeing a 2 data point comparison, this month and last month, this month versus a year ago last month, or like we don't want, or we see tables of numbers, like a spreadsheet grid. Good luck interpreting that, right?
Right.
So even if you do what Excel would just call a line chart, or others might call a run chart, and give yourself 15, 20 data points, 2 years worth of monthly data, you can actually visually see, is there a real trend? Does it appear to be just fluctuating around an average? Like there's just so much insight that comes from plotting the dots, look at a chart. But then a process behavior chart adds 3 important horizontal lines to that chart. We calculate the average for a baseline period and we plot that average on a chart. Now we can start looking to see, we have above average data points and below average data points. Is it just fluctuating around an average? And are we overreacting to the data points that are worse than average? So that's why the subtitle of my book is React Less, Lead Better, Improve More.
Right.
There are, in so many different industries and different settings, people are overreacting to every up and down in the data. So we plot the average. But then we do a little bit of simple math. It is not calculus, it is arithmetic. It can be done in your iPhone calculator or a spreadsheet, or you could do it on paper. We calculate what are called the lower limit and the upper limit. So those are generally symmetrical around the average. And then we can look at the chart visually and start interpreting off of just visual rules. Is the metric, you could say, in control, or is it predictable? Where it's just fluctuating around an average and all of the data points are within those calculated limits. We would look and say, don't react to any individual data point. We could instead try to figure out how to improve the system to try to shift performance up or down in the direction we're trying to make it go. And then if we see, there's 3 simple rules to look at visually. If there are data points outside of those limits, that's a time to react and ask what happened. It's what you might call a special cause. That's a time it would be appropriate to use some of our root cause analysis skills to say what was different in the time period that generated that data point.
Right.
But if we have a data point that's just sort of a typical worse than average data point, it's part of what we might call the noise in the system. Don't go looking for a root cause because it literally is not there. Don't waste your time chasing all the ups and downs.
Right.
Is one of the lessons of
that's such a powerful lesson, and something that I think probably everyone that's listening to this can resonate with. If you've worked anywhere where there are charts, I think that you have leaders that, again, maybe don't understand what a true control chart or process behavior chart should look like, or how to read a chart. And they're pulling you in all of these different directions every time there's an uptick or what they think is a problem on the chart because yesterday it wasn't as high as the day before. They're causing you to react, and waste a
lot of time.
You're chasing your tail, right? Sometimes when really it's just noise in the system.
And what happens is, let's say you have a data point that's worse than average. The boss tells people to go investigate. People will go through the motions of looking for a cause. And in the meantime, guess what happens? It tends to fluctuate back.
Right.
And now you have a data point that's better than average. Somebody may have, BS explanation for what happened or what they did, right? People may get blamed wrongly for performance dropping, quote unquote.
Sure.
And then they may get rewarded for performance regressing to the mean. And so, again, I try not to blame people for what they haven't been taught. There are a lot of very traditional ways of showing metrics, even including, a lot of the ways lean management systems are taught. But we can do better. So the challenge now, like the math of a process behavior chart is easy. Changing habits is really difficult, right? So Don Wheeler and I think in my book, I'm passing along a solution to a problem that people either don't recognize or don't recognize, they don't think it's a problem.
Right.
We're being action-oriented leaders. We're driving results when it might be the equivalent from a lean standpoint of wasted motion.
Sure.
Of real progress.
Sure. I did have a question based on what you just said. We had this discussion yesterday, but I was curious to hear, why do you think more leaders don't use process control charts or process behavior charts?
I mean, for one, they don't know about them, right? It's not taught. And I say this with an MBA. It was not taught. I had statistics classes, but a lot of it was theoretical statistics as opposed to practical workplace statistics. So it's not taught to people. Or I think if it's taught, process behavior charts or control charts, which to me are a simple statistical method, it gets shrouded in the complexity and the mysticism of Six Sigma.
Right.
And there is no reason why you can't use a process behavior chart without any sort of formal belt certification. Right?
That actually leads me to my first question. So I actually had a question written down. Right in your preface, you get hot and heavy here, and I actually underlined it. It says anyone can use them without a Six Sigma belt or statistics degree. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I love this because I think more people need to hear it. That it doesn't, the level of complexity doesn't, you don't need to be worried about that. Don't allow the fear of that to keep you back from really diving into what these charts can really do for you, right?
Yeah.
You also say in chapter 1 that the desire to improve, but may not know that they have the desire to improve, but they may not know how to, right? So what's your recommendation for someone who may not have a special certification, but wants to learn how to react less and lead better? Where do they start? And is this book for them? Is this the right place to start? Okay.
Well,
figured you'd say that.
Well, it is for them. And the book is written.
Yeah.
There are two audiences. One is the audience that has never been exposed to any of this, but maybe recognizes the situation where there are a lot of best efforts and good intentions, but we're not really moving the needle on our metrics. They're fluctuating a small amount. Or if we do the 2 data point comparison from year to year, we might say, well, productivity improved 2% last year. Did it fall 3% the previous year? Like that might be a symptom of something that's just maybe performance is stagnated. And so maybe people are looking for a different method. There's another audience where, again, no disrespect to Six Sigma as a methodology or to the black belts or the master black belts, but sometimes that has overcomplicated the control chart methodology. So I think there's a secondary audience for the book. And I've had master black belts in workshops that I've taught that have learned, the 6 different types of control charts and the flow chart that helps you decide which chart to use when. And I could point those people to deeper Don Wheeler references and textbooks and articles that basically sort of prove the point that we're not dumbing this down by gravitating around this one type of chart, which is called an XMR chart or a control chart for individuals. We can use this one methodology in almost every single situation And so there's that audience that says, okay, well, I learned this super complex approach and it was actually more complex than it needs to be. Now I've got something that's simpler and arguably more valid for real world data. They can kind of scale back from, okay, there was all this complexity that I haven't been able to get anyone to really take interest in because it's intimidating. Say, well, here's a simpler method that is valid and useful and helps us improve more. Final thing I'll say is back to your point of like, we want to improve, but we don't know how. Like to me, a lot of problem solving and lean improvement is about really understanding cause and effect relationships. We made a change. Did it really improve the system? And when we do 2 data point comparisons, or we only have 4 data points, we can fool ourselves intentionally or otherwise. And process behavior charts can really help us evaluate projects to see, have we really shifted performance in a statistically meaningful way? We don't want to declare victory over 1 or 2 data points that are better than the baseline average. So yeah, I mean, the book is intended for, again, people who don't know anything about process behavior charts, not their fault that they don't know about it. And also for that audience that is maybe trying to look to scale back from what might be unnecessary control chart complexity.
Yeah, makes sense. And that's actually the main point of your first chapter is that run charts show us more than 1 to 2 data points, right? And the power in using that. The title of your first chapter is What Gets Measured Gets Managed. And in my experience going into different companies, what I tend to see, which you talk about in this first chapter, is a lot of green on charts because maybe leadership or management doesn't want to see red. They want to make the metrics look good, right? Or there's this fear-based culture, so in that first chapter, you ask the question, how often are leaders pressured to make metrics look good instead of improving the system and its underlying performance? And I think, obviously a lot of us have heard, and you even speak to the fact that a bad system will beat a good person every time.
Right.
Do you see this a lot in your experience?
Yes, but can I pull the and-on cord real quick?
Absolutely.
So chapter 1, polite correction. Chapter 1 is titled Improving the Way We Improve.
Oh, whoops. Sorry about that.
And within that chapter, though, I do bring up this expression that gets used a lot. What gets measured gets managed.
Yes. Okay. That's what
organizations, in my experience, spend a lot of time on the measurement part. It's not an automatic, if we measure it, we are guaranteed to improve. When we say what gets measured gets managed, my book is really more about what does gets managed mean? Sure. So back to your question though, this pressure to make things look better, yes, I mean that exists. I point back to Brian Joyner, who was a contemporary / student of Dr. Deming. Mm-hmm. And I think Joyner is usually who we credit with saying, look, when people are under pressure to hit a goal, so here's the green versus red, there are 3 things that can happen. We, people in an organization, can distort the data. Mm-hmm. We start looking for data points or patient surveys that are invalid for some reason, and we start throwing out what we think is invalid data to make the number artificially look good. I think the second thing that happens is we distort the system. If you look at, famous example, Veterans Administration, healthcare was under extreme pressure to get waiting times down. So you had people distorting data, like literally going in and fudging the numbers in the system. The distortion of the system would be someone wanted an appointment and people across the country were making waiting lists to get on the waiting list because the clock didn't start ticking yet. That was not improving waiting time. That was distorting the system that made the numbers look better. And then the third thing is actually improving the system. And so when improving the system is harder than distorting the data or distorting the system, when people aren't getting support from their leaders to actually improve the system, we end up just kind of spinning our wheels or fooling ourselves or making things look good instead of making things actually better. So that pressure is there, and that pressure has to be accompanied with a methodology. Dr. Deming would always ask, by what method? Mm-hmm. So if somebody says, well, our goal, we're doing an A3, or we call it a stretch goal, or our goal is to have 95% of patients give us a 9 or a 10 out of 10 recommendation rating. Okay, it's one thing to set a goal. By what method are we going to get there? And my book is really more about those methods and using statistics to make sure we have valid cause and effect understanding as we manage.
Makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for the clarification on that.
Sure.
You've already mentioned a few times about the side of managing this. One of the things that I noticed and that I also read in your book was just about sometimes we try to measure too much. Sometimes we have, too many measures or too many key performance indicators. So what would the result be for an organization, or in your experience, what have you seen where organizations do have too many metrics? What happens?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, you said the phrase there, the key phrase, key performance indicators, KPIs.
Yes.
And I think this is a phrase I coined. I would credit somebody, if I could remember learning it from somebody, that KPI does not mean kajillion performance indicators. Let's remember.
I've heard you say that before. That's good. I like that.
Means key. And so there are things that are easy to measure, and then there are measures that are meaningful. Mm-hmm. They may not be the same thing. So when we generate lots of metrics because they're easy to measure, then we may get in that trap of, let's say we have a quote unquote dashboard with 30 different metrics, and 15 of them are worse than they were the month before. And we have everyone go chasing and investigating those 15 metrics. And it's just a lot of organizational wasted motion when we're doing that. So, I mean, again, we think of dashboard, like you look at your car, there are not 30 different measures displayed in real time in your car.
Right.
So
there could be, though. I mean, there's plenty to measure.
Behind the scenes,
right,
there are probably hundreds of things being measured, and there's an onboard computer. I'm showing my auto industry roots, and my dad used to work on these systems as an electrical engineer. The onboard computer has all sorts of information that you could have it barf out to you if needed, right, to do a deep dive into something that's wrong with the vehicle. But as an organization, like having 30 metrics on a dashboard, that's not a dashboard. Mm-hmm. What are really the key performance indicators? If you're measuring everything, maybe that says you don't know what's important, and that's a problem, right?
That's right.
So the other analogy I think of is health. Mm-hmm. I've spent a lot of time working with the operations side of medical laboratories. I'm not a medical technologist, but I've been around that to know it's probably fair to say hundreds of diagnostic tests related to blood or other bodily fluids, and there are literally hundreds of things you could measure about your body. Mm-hmm. But you do that maybe at best with an annual physical, and even that annual physical has a few key measures, right?
Sure.
Cholesterol, a couple subset numbers of cholesterol, blood pressure. The one that we probably look at every day is the number on the scale, right? Mm-hmm. So we might all look, and this is going to depend on the individual and our health history and family risk, what have you. You can look at your weight, but again, weight is just one number, right? You could gain weight, that number on the scale, and find that your pants fit better than they did a month ago, mm-hmm. right? So I think there are lessons to say any one metric can be misleading or distorted. There are probably a handful of key measures, right? So I have family history of diabetes. I'm not diabetic. I don't check my blood sugar the way a diabetic might, but between weight and a few other measures, like I'm trying to manage that system to prevent becoming diabetic and having to measure my blood sugar multiple times a day. So I think, keep in mind what are key metrics, what are the key measures that really help us gauge either our personal health or our organizational health. Are we performing at a level where we need to be, quote unquote, in the green? Sure. Or is performance heading in a good direction or not? Those are some of the lessons that I try to get across in the book.
And just a question just that I have based on what you just said.
Mhm.
Sometimes, and there will probably be people on the call now or listening to this that are under maybe management that has already decided what those measures are
Mhm.
for us.
Mhm.
What would you suggest for someone that doesn't have the decision-making abilities or decision-making they're not a manager, they're not an executive leader that can make those changes? What would you suggest for someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, the one thing I would do to help filter out the noise
Mm-hmm.
in the different charts and to eliminate the wasted organizational motion,
Mm-hmm.
if I were forced to track 30 metrics because somebody told me I had to, I would want 30 process behavior charts.
Mm.
I might also look at the goal or the target, that red-green boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two things I would be looking for. There are two dimensions here. Which metrics are always red? That tells us we need to improve the system. If that metric is always red and it's fluctuating within the calculated control limits on the chart, the way to improve that system is not by looking at any single data point.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to step back and understand why performance is where it is. And this is where, I say this is a more systematic approach to improvement. It could be an A3, it could be a Six Sigma project, but something that is decidedly less reactive. What went wrong last month? Probably nothing. What was different last quarter? Probably nothing. Improve the system. Now, there might be some metrics that show what we call these statistical signals. Those are charts that I'm going to react to and focus my efforts in understanding what changed, either for the better or for the worse. Because we can't treat every up and down in the chart equally. But then the other thing we want to look at is make sure we're not overreacting to a metric that we could say is predictable or in control.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when the average is really close to the red-green boundary? That metric is constantly fluctuating from red to green. Now, a lot of organizations have rules of thumb that I would say are just statistical nonsense. So like, well, anytime the metric is red 2 months in a row, you need to go do a root cause analysis. Maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not, right? If that's just fluctuation. So again, I'm not saying you don't need to improve, but I'm trying to help people get out of that overly reactive mode of thinking. So sometimes you need to kind of take a breath, take a step back, and be more systematic instead of being just fully reactive all the time.
Right. Makes sense. You hit on this just a little bit, but on tracking the wrong metrics too. So if someone may have too many metrics, they also may be tracking the wrong metrics. I just think about one organization that I worked with that measured and celebrated the number of green belts and black belts certified every quarter or whatever it was, right? But they never had any concern with the results that the belts were contributing. So they were obviously focused on the wrong metric. So I just am curious in your experience. You mentioned these vanity metrics in your book. Can you speak to those a little bit and just the dangers of vanity metrics?
Yeah, and I'll give credit for that phrase, vanity metrics, to Eric Ries, who's the author of the book, The Lean Startup, and his most recent book, The Startup Way. So vanity metrics, I'm paraphrasing a definition. I'm not citing Eric directly on this, but the concept is like those things that are easy to measure and they may make things look good, but they aren't meaningful, right? So I'll use an example of KaiNexus, a software company that I've been involved with for 9 years. We can track, it is easily measured, how many people come to our website every day. That is not something to go hang your hat on, let's say, to investors and say, well, traffic on our website is up 114% compared to last year.
Right.
Well, who cares? Have we sold more software? Like, that is our business model. Right. So when we do, I spend a lot of time with KaiNexus doing podcasts and webinars, and there are many measurable things related to those, but they are vanity metrics. Now, at best, they're an important part of a sales and marketing value stream, if you will. Right. So the very first step in that marketing and sales funnel is establishing contact with people who did not previously know who or what KaiNexus is.
Mm-hmm.
But, so then there's that question between cause and effect. If we were to stop doing webinars, and I'm not saying we're even talking about this, but just throwing out a scenario. If we were to stop doing webinars, because we could start looking and say, well, there's a time investment and there's a cost to doing the webinars. And there are a lot of reasons to do it because we all learn and we're trying to help others learn and support the Lean and Six Sigma communities in different ways. But if we were to stop doing the webinars, what is the cause and effect between not doing webinars and future sales and marketing? Like
Sure.
That might be an unknowable connection,
Mm-hmm.
right? We think of a business as a complex system. But we can look at examples where we can make stronger, tighter connections between cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of veering off of your original question, so rein me back in. But just
good stuff.
The quick example I was going to share was like working with a surgical center, and they were trying to improve patient satisfaction. They have to. I mean, is that a vanity metric or not? That could be debated. Mm-hmm. There is sometimes a financial compensation impact to the patient satisfaction scores. So
Sure.
It's probably not a pure vanity metric, but there's risk if there is pressure to increase the score. And like, to me, it's always a red flag. And I've called timeout when I hear someone say, those scores need to go up. I'm like, wait a minute, timeout. Are you trying to improve the score, or do you want happier patients? Those are not necessarily one and the same thing. They should be.
That's right.
But there are distortions of the data. There are distortions of the system. You're on the elevator leaving, and there are these signs browbeating you into, please, please, please give us a 10 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Because a patient, that might, I'm not typical, that might irritate me.
Right.
Well, I might have given you a 10, but not if you're begging for it. Like you seem more concerned about the score than you seem about my follow-up care. Wait a minute, right?
That's right.
So that chase of the score to some people may hurt patient satisfaction. But so when we looked at cause and effect, like, well, we knew from data and voice of the customer that one reason patients were unhappy was long waiting times between arrival and getting back into the OR. So now we start looking at the process. We're not just looking at managing the metric.
Right.
We're looking at the system and the processes. And then we were able to identify, and we looked at the waiting times. It was in control from a control chart standpoint. So we tried to systematically improve the system. What are the common causes of delay? Mm-hmm. What are the process changes that we can make that are intended to reduce that delay? Right. So we had a chain of cause and effect. We make these changes to the system. We reduced waiting times. That could be measured very quickly. Here's the rub. We didn't know for a fact that reducing waiting time would move the needle on the patient satisfaction scores because those are lagging.
Right.
Right. But given enough time, I think it was a reasonable cause and effect that the things that we did led to improvements. And we could see on a process behavior chart that we had really shifted waiting times down. Performance was better. And then we could see the resulting signal in the chart, the process behavior chart of patient satisfaction scores, that it wasn't just fluctuating a little bit better that month. It was significantly, statistically speaking, better than it was before. So those are the types of honest cause and effect relationships we need to have instead of just doing whatever it takes to make some metric look better in an artificial way. I think that's dangerous for the long-term health of an organization, making things look good instead of actually improving.
Right. No, that's such a great example. And I think you also used the example, you mentioned this already once, but about weight, that's another one too. I think you say in the book something to the effect of, just because I lose weight that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm getting healthier, right?
Correct.
I mean, I could be gaining weight and getting healthiher.
Correct. And I say this as an engineer, not a dietitian or a physician, but I can say from personal experience, there are healthy ways to lose weight, and there are potentially unhealthy, damaging ways of losing weight, right? So, I think we need to keep, the end in mind. If the end is health, what are the cause and effect relationships in our life that can help systematically improve that system? And we can learn to be less reactive. So go and weigh yourself every day. Now, to eliminate some of the variation, you probably want to weigh yourself at the same time, first thing in the
Mm-hmm.
morning is a good recommendation on your way. Just make consistent circumstances. And if your weight is stable, you'll start noticing that that number is not the exact same number every day.
Mm-hmm.
And each individual's weight is probably going to have its own natural fluctuation to it.
Right.
So I've heard some experts say, well, to make sure you don't overreact to every up and down, you should only weigh yourself once a week. Like, well, that's one strategy. Or you could weigh yourself daily and learn to not overreact.
Right.
And the advantage of weighing yourself daily is that if you plot your weight on a process behavior chart, you can detect shifts that are either good or bad more quickly than you ever could with a weekly metric.
Sure.
Because if you weigh yourself once a week, again, there is going to be fluctuation. Probably less so if your weight is stable.
Right.
And you don't want to overreact to those fluctuations, kind of the same as you would avoid reacting to ups and downs on a daily number.
Makes sense, for sure. Yeah, and you said that having the end in mind is key, and I agree with that, because obviously if it's to be healthier, then weight might not even be a measure that you look at, or it might be. It just depends on the situation or what the end goal is for you. So I agree completely. There are three questions that you introduce us to around what to ask yourself when you're looking at a chart, process behavior chart. You say, are we achieving the target? Are we improving? And how do we improve? And I like how you walk us through that in the book around just how you tie continuous improvement back to these charts, right? There's a reason why we're collecting this data. It's not just to put wallpaper on the wall and look at it and show executives when they come through. We need to actually be taking action on this stuff and responding appropriately. And
that's the third question, right?
Yes.
How do we improve? When should we react? And when should we not? Like, when should we react to a data point or a cluster of data points? And when do we need to step back and be more systematic about the
Exactly.
improvement? Right. So there is a time for quick response. There's an immediate problem. There are lessons from Toyota mentors of mine of you want to do problem solving when the problem is fresh. So what went wrong last hour or what went wrong yesterday, that is a time to be really fast and reactive. But when it's a situation where the chart is showing nothing but noise, statistical noise, as we would say, that's not a time to react. Now, if performance is, again, not where it needs to be or where you want it to be, there's a different improvement pathway than that knee-jerk reactive root cause analysis short-term pathway.
For sure, absolutely. There is a question in the chat from Steve. I was just looking over at that. It said, best to get real honest feedback, not just all tens. Don't you think feedback is better as open-ended questions to get information and not numbered questions?
Yes.
So any feedback on that?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, organizations do both, right? So when I was working with that outpatient surgery center, people are asked to give numerical responses, and then there are places for free form responses, right? So there are kind of overall high-level satisfaction questions. Would you recommend this outpatient surgery center to others? But then it gets broken down and there are more detailed questions. So you can look and say, well, what if any of those questions are significantly performing worse than others? So yeah, there's a time to dig through the data. But like what we found looking through that database of patient surveys is that the free form responses to the open-ended questions were incredibly useful and incredibly helpful, because you don't want to just see that somebody was dissatisfied. You want to know why. And
Absolutely.
Look for kind of common themes and patterns. And we used other simple tools like Pareto charts and trying to figure out where are the high impact areas. And waiting time was one of them. And then just the place had gotten a little shabby. It was an old facility. Like I'm a big a little bit of paint and fixing of the floors. It just creates a better first impression. And people had said very directly, like, this place is kind of a dump. It didn't give us a good impression. It didn't make us feel confident about our care, right? So there was no single magical root cause to dissatisfaction. And the other thing, just to get into the weeds a little bit, healthcare almost always measures the percentage of patients who gave a 9 or a 10. And like, to me, that's an unnecessary distillation of the data.
Mm-hmm.
Why not just report the median score or the average score? When you're looking at, the percent, let's say you have 75% of patients gave you a 9 or a 10. Did the other 25% give me an 8? Or is there a, forgive the statistical jargon, a bimodal distribution where there's one bell curve of very happy people, and at the other extreme, 25% of them were extremely unhappy?
And I would want to know that.
I would want to know that. And the typical way of saying like, oh, well, 75% gave you a 9 or 10, that's semi-useless, or it's not helpful enough to help drive improvement.
That's right.
And I've been in a lot of organizations where, people give speeches, and it's kind of we hope those numbers get better. And I think we'd probably all agree there's that expression, hope is not a strategy, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I appreciate that. Great insight into that question. I want to go back to X charts or individual charts, which are basically run charts with some extra information to help with decisions. Mm-hmm. I love how you break down and explain so that everyone can understand, what these are, right? You don't have to be afraid of them. They're not as complicated as some would say, but there's, in explaining the control limits on the X chart, you call them guardrails, which I love that too, right? Guardrails. Yeah. And then how do you feel that guardrails on an X chart can help leaders to make better decisions?
Well, so here, and I'll apologize to people who are just listening on audio, but let me just show, a picture does tell 1,000 words, right? So for those who are on the webinar and in the YouTube recording, I've pulled up an example of a process behavior chart. So we see, the data points in blue, the average is in green, and then those limits or those guardrails, those are calculated numbers. Again, to emphasize, like those limits are not the target or the goal. They are not chosen. They are calculated based on how your system has been performing and fluctuating over time. And so how this chart helps a leader, back to your point, Patrick, or your question, in those first data points where those numbers are just fluctuating around an average, do not waste time asking questions like, why was this data point better? That data point was the best we've seen this year. There's probably no root cause. There's probably no explanation. And don't ask why this below average data point is there. Like, every single data point has, we see headlines all the time, such and such number, it's the highest it's ever been. Every data set has a data point where it's the highest one. It doesn't mean it's statistically meaningful. Right. So when we stop reacting to the noise, we can focus our efforts where we see signals. So as it's illustrated on the chart here, a single data point below the lower limit, that is a time to ask, right? So if I've got a dashboard with 6 metrics, and one of them shows a signal, that's the one I want to focus on. Right. And then we may show, as the chart shows visually, if you have 8 or more consecutive data points that are above average or below average, that is statistically unlikely to be continued random fluctuation. So we could say that that's a shift in performance, whether it's the result of something we did, like an improvement project, or something that has just occurred. We need to go and investigate and understand cause and effect. What do we think led to that signal in the chart? More importantly, what led to that change in performance? Because again, emphasizing what you said, Patrick, it's not about creating charts that are technically correct. It's about managing the organization, running the business. And then there's a third type of signal that's shown visually in the middle of the chart. If you have 3 consecutive or 3 out of 4 data points that are closer to the limit than they are to the average, we're looking for things that are just, statistically unlikely to be the continuation of the old system. So just one other point, going back to Don Wheeler, like, he calls these process behavior charts because they are charts that illustrate the behavior of your process. You could also call them a system behavior chart or an organizational behavior chart. But anyway, but he also, like, to help emphasize what these are for, he kind of half jokingly, he says you could call these a has the system changed chart.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, you could call it is it time to react chart. And so we kind of, as he says and writes, when we filter out the noise, and then when we stop wasting time chasing all the noise, we can better focus on our efforts as leaders or as improvers, on helping change the system in a positive way, or responding to a negative change that maybe just occurred. And now we want to go and investigate the cause so we can eliminate that cause and at the least shift performance back to where it had been.
Right.
So it's really all about running the business better and not just being happy that performance is continuing to fluctuate. Mm-hmm. If I had a dashboard where all 10 metrics were just fluctuating around an average, then I'm going to start making judgment calls around which metrics need to have their performance boosted, and then how do we do that in a systematic way? And again, I think a little bit of organizational focus goes a long way.
Absolutely. Makes a ton of sense, especially obviously, like you said, a picture, is a great way to think about that. So for those that are listening, I think you can probably find those out on your blog or your website, right? Obviously in the book.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'd like people to go read the book, but there's a long blog post and an embedded webinar on the KaiNexus website. It's part of the webinar series that we did. I'm more than happy if people go and look. There's a lot of free information online about how to do this methodology. I hope they would find the book, enjoyable and incrementally more helpful. But
absolutely. And we do have a few minutes left before the top of the hour. I did have a couple other things that I wanted to ask you about. Mm-hmm. One of them was your pick chart. So if leaders have stopped making unnecessary changes or responding unnecessarily, and they understand how control charts are working, they start working on continuous improvement within their organization based on those signals. Mm-hmm. They're going to have some areas, some action items, some solutions, and then they need to prioritize those. And you introduce us to what you call a pick chart, which I'm familiar with, but I've never heard it called that, and I really do like that. But I'm curious if you could just explain what that is and how it can be used in benefit with process behavior charts.
Yeah, and it's a different chart. It's not charting data or metrics, but it's you could almost call it a pick matrix, or it's often called something like an effort impact matrix. 2x2 matrix, probably invented by some MBA at a consulting firm, because consulting firms love 2x2 matrices. And I say that as a consultant with an MBA, so I'm throwing stones in my own glass house. But you've got potential countermeasures or improvements. And PickChart is credited to Lockheed Martin Corporation going back a long time. Okay. So you have different countermeasures. Now, one trap or one thing to be careful about is, we're making a prediction of these countermeasures. The ideal would be a countermeasure that's low effort, high impact. Mm-hmm. You want to maybe choose those or go test those first, because when I look at a pick chart, we're making a prediction of cause and effect relationship, and those predictions are not always going to be perfect. So then there are 4 quadrants. So there are a lot of times people would say, well, if something is high effort, low impact, the original term from Lockheed was let's kill those. So the PICK is an acronym. In healthcare, I've heard people say kibosh, because we don't want to use the word kill. Right? So you have possible, implement, challenge, and kibosh. Yes. Right? So the challenge category quadrant is interesting. High effort, high impact. Mm-hmm. How can we possibly take high effort and break that down into smaller chunks that are lower effort? Right. So when I teach or coach people on pick charts, the one caution I give is don't let something just sit and rot in that high effort, high impact category. Mm-hmm. break that down into smaller projects or smaller initiatives, or within that large effort thing, maybe there is a small effort component that drives the bigger impact. But, I see, I share it in the book because a lot of organizations in the context of Lean or Lean Six Sigma use pick charts. Like I said, there are a few traps or a few things to look out for, but I think it's a decent framework as long as we view it as kind of framing our hypotheses that we're then going to test, and then use the process behavior chart to confirm, was the impact large or small?
Yeah, makes sense. I appreciate that. And the last thing that I wanted to just wrap up with today is because it's one of my favorite activities, the red bead experiment.
Yeah.
And you talk about the red bead experiment in the book, and in the beginning you talk about the system, and if the system is broken, obviously the people can't be successful, and people don't come to work wanting to do a bad job. They come to work and they want to do well. They want to do a good job. And unfortunately, if the system is broken, if the system is not set up for them to succeed, they're going to struggle. They're going to have headaches. They're going to hate their job. And the red bead experiment is a perfect example of what that looks like. And I know that you've held many of these, and you talk about it in the book, but can you just, for those that have never seen the red bead experiment, can you just talk through that and maybe just give some insights in your experience of leading it?
And there's no substitute for actually playing it and participating in it. But it was a simulation, a learning exercise that was created as a gift to Dr. Deming. I love this. Like, some Hewlett-Packard engineer created this for him. And then he used it, I think, very famously in the last decade of his career, of his life. So in the red bead experiment, like, there's this scenario, and there's role playing, and you're this factory that's quote unquote producing beads. Well, we're not producing anything. We're dipping a paddle with 50 holes in it down into a bucket full of beads. We're trying to produce white beads, and the red beads in the container are deemed defects, right? So, and then we have maybe 6 people dipping the paddle, and we play multiple rounds, and like, that game helps us see some of the ridiculousness in management practices we might not otherwise step back to consider, right? So people are in on the joke that the number of red beads is basically a random number.
Yeah.
But yet we're giving an employee of the month award, and we're putting someone on probation, which brings up the point, the idea that comes from Deming and others. Every system is perfectly designed to generate the results it generates. There is no reason or root cause for the differences in any individual's performance in that red bead system. There is no root cause or explanation for differences in day-to-day performance. And so, I offer incentives. We set a goal. We're tracking the numbers on a chart. We're threatening to fire people. We're threatening to close the factory down. But then we get to the end of it, and before the final round, I'll fire the bottom 3 participants. And then one of the things, and this became much more apparent of running and playing and facilitating the game. So here's my intentionally provocative comment. Like, a lot of people worship at the altar of data-driven decision making. What do you mean? Data decision-driven making is a good thing. I'd say sometimes. Mm-hmm. In the red bead game, when I fire those bottom 3 performers, it is data-driven, but it is a bad decision.
Right.
I basically randomly fired 3 people, and I could replace them with 3 others, or I make the other 3 pull double shifts. That didn't change the system, right? So it brings up all of these awkward, difficult conversations about performance evaluation and comparing the performance of different hospitals within a system, or comparing the performance of different surgeons within the same hospital. So it brings up some really sticky and difficult questions around being careful of. We don't just want data-driven decisions. We want good decisions.
That's right.
Driven by maybe a better view of statistics, and process behavior charts help us see that. And when at the end of the red bead game, when we do a process behavior chart of the number of red beads drawn, we see, of course, it's just randomly fluctuating around a number that is usually approximately 10, because 10 out of 50, there are basically 20% red beads in the box.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing I think is interesting, and then I'll wrap up my thought on that. It is easy for us to predict that the average would be roughly 10. Sometimes the average is 9.5. Sometimes the average is 10.7. Predict the range of variation. That's impossible to do. And the lower and upper limits usually get calculated to be about 2 and 18. And as we keep playing the game, we see like, yeah, it's going to be very rare that somebody only gets one red bead.
Mm-hmm.
It could happen. It could be a false positive in the process behavior chart, getting into the statistics of it again. But the process behavior chart tells us pretty accurately. This is why we sometimes call this a predictable system. We could predict, we keep playing the game, almost always, 99% of the time, person's going to draw between 2 and 18 red beads.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I've one other final point. Asking medical leaders who have played the game, and I share the story in the book, chief medical officer from an academic medical center was sitting in the front row. I don't think he played the red bead game, but he was very engaged and very attentive. And I asked the group, like, well, so what are some of the red beads in our workplace? And he paused, and he was absolutely serious about this, and this was his epiphany moment. He's like, every single one of our quality and patient safety metrics is red beads. Why did the number of falls increase from 2 to 4 last week? Should we blame and punish somebody? Should we look for a root cause that's not there?
Right.
Now, again, I'm not saying don't try to improve.
Right.
I'm saying don't react to the individual data point. Do try to improve the system.
That's
and a
right.
process behavior chart can show that, well, the average number of falls went from 3 down to 0.4. Something like that could
exactly
demonstrate. If we had 8 consecutive weeks of below average falls, we would feel confident that we're actually improving that system. And then let's keep improving.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, this has been great, Mark. We're at the top of the hour. We could probably talk for forever. I mean, I think we only got into a few chapters. Oh yeah, for sure.
I ramble on and on about this stuff, but I hope
it's great. So for those that are on the call right now or listening in, where can they get your book? Where can they learn more if they're interested to hear more? Where should they go?
Yeah, so they can find the book on Amazon in either paperback format or Kindle format. They can also go to the book's website, measuresofsuccessbook.com. There are occasionally other places you can buy the paperback online. The ebook is Amazon exclusive. If people are for some reason interested in a signed copy, I don't mean that sounded more dismissive than I meant. If you would like a signed copy, I'm honored, and I would be happy to sell you one directly and mail it to you. Or if people want to do a bulk order, we can also work that out directly. But again, lots of free resources and information at measuresofsuccessbook.com. I was trying to be humble about the book autograph thing, and it sounded dismissive. So
you're good.
My apologies.
Thank you, Mark, so much. Appreciate the time. Appreciate all of the great the practical examples, the stories from your book. We got an inside look today, and I definitely appreciate you taking time out of your day to give us that. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend.